So today we're going to pick up about where we left off last time in terms of an example of effective organization. And other than that, we're really going to talk a lot about boundaries and how a community can assert them. So we'll do. We'll also do a little bit. We're gonna address some things, and we're gonna talk about fiction and some things that might be a little obvious, but need to be said anyway. But let's just start. So this was part of an occupation in the University of Washington, but I just want you to watch this. Look at that. That's wonderful. This community here is using an effective strategy, wildly outnumbering the members of the state here. And this, when we're talking about the context of ICE, this is what every neighborhood needs to have, right? Um, you hear what they're saying, move back, pretty clear boundary, right? Imagine every time we saw these unmasked or these masked plainclothes agents or mercenaries that we were talking about in Worcester last time. Imagine that situation if the community had this, right? You could push the mercenaries out with a very clear boundary. Move back, get out of our community. So I think each of them having like an improvised riot shield is important. The camera angle isn't identifying any of them to be targeted later, which is beneficial. They're moving in unison, they're speaking in unison. It's just a really, really powerful and inspiring thing to see. Now, to a lot of people, this might look very unruly or um, curious if this is like an unlawful assembly or something dangerous. And what I really want to communicate right now is that power is not what determines the level of destruction or cruelty that's taken place, right? All of us have the capability to hurt like a kitten or puppy, but we don't. You have the capability, the power right now to break all the windows in your house, but you don't. So capability and power aren't what determines um, how destructive behavior is going to be. We'll just put it that way. In fact, it's really beneficial for the people to have power over their government, for the people to have power over their corporations, and for the people to have power over religions. Because if we look at this channel, this idea of Ranquez, the abolition of despair, the art of abolishing despair, is those are some very high contributors to the deaths of despair, right? Probably more corporations than the other two right now, but we do see in fascism how an idea for theocracy, as well as the merger of corporation and state, this is like a coalescence of all of these powers for the specific purpose to abuse the powers that these institutions have. So this is really what we want to see. This is an excellent example, though short, of human beings being able to protect their neighbors effectively, because these officers are just so outnumbered. They can't do anything right now. They're sure they might regroup and they might come back with a SWAT team, or legislators might make it legal to run these guys over with armored vehicles, but that's not the purpose of why we assert boundaries, right? We assert boundaries so that our rights are respected, and where those rights aren't respected, that's when we have to organize further. I also want to talk about fiction, and we'll start, because I want to talk about fiction, we're going to start with some of the scene from Arcane. And just, if you haven't seen this, I'm not going to spoil anything, but this is an excellent tale of two cities, upper and underclass struggle work of art. And the characters who are meeting here, we're going to start it there. But the characters that are meeting here, this guy in the dark, he is part of a liberation struggle against an oppressive and privileged class. He is a villain in this story. He does a lot of bad things, obviously. The person that he's talking to is a member of a privileged and oppressive extracting class. And so, but the person that he's talking to, who's going to be wearing the white, he's somebody who wants to increase the standard of living of all, including the people who are forced into poverty by what establishes privilege. And so I highly recommend the show Arcane because it's excellent. But this character here, this villain who's trying to fight for liberation, he uh, he asserts a boundary, and I just want it to be clear how excellent this boundary is, and we'll see if you can see it.
Free trade routes, blanket amnesty, unrestricted access to the Hexgate's sovereignty. You really think you're in a position to demand all this?
I give you credit for your stunt. Boy, didn't think you had the stomach. But the big display followed by a request for parley. You're tipping your hand.
So the reason these two characters are meeting is because this guy in white decided to take it upon himself to take a task force into the Undercity where the poverty is, and devastate some infrastructure for what he believes are morally justified reasons. For the most part. What's great about this show is that the characters, they're pretty much all shades of gray, right? It's kind of one of those Breaking Bad or Ozark type things where uh, that you can understand the motivations, even if you, as the viewer, disagree with what the characters do. You can kind of see where they're coming from, and it's just really good character writing in that respect. But we see that the guy on the left here was very specific about the demands, right? And that's, I think, a very important thing for asserting boundaries against oppression. So that's what that list was. This is what is required for us to, lay to rest any conflict that we have in order to not escalate anything into a war time, because this basically this entire show is a bunch of people trying to prevent a war that seems increasingly inevitable because of how much of a disparity of agency the people within it have, the disparity of uh, needs, human needs being reached, and all of that. But we'll continue.
You're afraid.
I am afraid. Today I got a glimpse of what war between us might look like. Your people wouldn't stand a chance. The Council couldn't care less. I'm trying to save you from annihilation.
Well, well. Not the fresh-faced Academy pledge, are you? You want peace. This is the price.
Bam, right there.
You'll
You see that? We'll watch that again. It's very clear. It's very, very clearly stated boundaries.
You'll discontinue the production of Shimmer.
I didn't back it up enough.
This is the price.
You want peace, this is the price, right?
You want peace. This is the price.
That is a beautiful example of exactly how people who want their human rights to remain protected by power structures that exist. If your power structure is going to exist, these are the rights that they're going to respect. If you do not respect the rights that we assert, there will not be peace. And I think that that's an excellent sentiment. One thing I also want to mention in terms of fiction and why I wanted to bring this up before we go into something else, which are a couple examples of effective organization against oppression. In fiction, it's easy for us to revel in the power fantasy that fiction is, right? Authors who write about oppression and liberation often want the good guys to win in the end, right? So we can watch Star Wars or the Hunger Games or whatever, and the good guys win and the people are liberated. That's not how history is, though. There's not necessarily a morality makes it come right in the end. There's a reason why Burma is now called Myanmar. There's a reason why the unceded land seems to shrink in the US and Canada. Uh, Throughout the years, there's a reason that there's a city called Los Angeles in what's now called the United States, which is an English-speaking country, and obviously England is not in the United States. So the dominant language being that of colonizers is proof that oppression can win. And Los Angeles is not Aztec language. It is Spanish language, and Spain is not near the Aztec or Mayan people. Spain is another colonizer overseas that was very effective at winning. I mean, there's a reason most of Palestine is called Israel now. So it's important to understand that life isn't a story. And I know you've probably understood this before, but you know, how many Katnisses never got a chance to liberate or even struggle to defend their rights or the rights of their family because they were buried under rubble after some drone strike? How many Luke Skywalkers were killed in that pursuit of rebelling against colonialism or imperialism? And this is kind of the situation that we're in, is what wins this war for liberation is not what is morally right. What wins this war is what is effective. uh, being on the side of human rights is beneficial in terms of most people will side with a vision of society that does not allow the abuse, mistreatment, and murder of human beings. So, in terms of support garnered, it's great to have that moral cause on your side. However, we see, like with Noam Chomsky's, and I always forget the other author of that book, but the manufacture of consent, we see that propaganda works, right? And with power, uh, power can accumulate wealth very effectively because wealth can be used to hire mercenaries to extract more things that are valuable, right? If you look at the World War II German economy, it was entirely a house of cards built upon different layers of debt, right? And the only way that that economy could look like it could be sustained was by increasingly stealing more and more things from the conquered territories and occupied territories to bolster and to pay off the loans that, again, this house of cards, house of cards, was built on. We know that, and have for a long time, that the fiat currency has a lot of issues. We know that the US dollar, though being incredibly prevalent right now, isn't actually backed by anything. And we understand that the need to increasingly print money decreases the spending value and therefore guarantees inflation. So, like, we know that fascism, the merger of the state and government, has a lot of issues. But the point with fascism is it is extracting value, and it is absolutely using that value to propagandize. And so even it's effective even to the point where many people will actually support the oppression and the revocation of human rights protections, which is sad, but I just really wanted it to be clear. I wanted to mention that because, it's easy for us to say, oh, it's just an inevitability that people who want a more beautiful and fair world will eventually win that fight. And it's really not the case. There are many times where the struggle for human rights failed. Oh, that's that one. Is this one? Here we go. Oh, I'm going to subject you to ads. No. All right, we're just going to say fuck you to that then. But we do have to understand that our level of organization is what determines whether or not we can establish a country where human rights are respected. Because, like, I'm watching The Handmaid's Tale for the first time. I'm in, like, season 5, so I'm not done. But oh,
Hey!
ads. But watching Handmaid's Tale, it's pretty brilliant in its criticism of authoritarianism and how effective it can be in terms of I don't need to spoil anything because the premise, if you're unfamiliar, is there's a fertility crisis in the world, and this authoritarian regime coups a government, or at least a good portion of it, to establish their own state. And it's a state based on theocracy and authoritarianism, specifically to capture and enslave fertile women to breed them, and that's what the handmaids are. But what was, I think, so masterfully done, and you see this right away, is there's such a worship for the idea of hierarchy in that society that even the privileged are obviously oppressed, right? There's like, it's patriarchal, so the man of the house, they call the shots, and the wives who are infertile just basically have to be okay with the fact that there's another woman there to get pregnant from their husband. And there are a lot of other examples of why it wouldn't be ideal to be a wife, but there are different tiers. Like there are slaves working themselves or being worked to death in colonies that are referenced pretty early on in the series. And so you see, like, there are different tiers of oppression, but it's still oppression, right? Even if you're in a more privileged situation.
Hi, my name's Plato, Molly Wickham of the Gitumden clan, which is one of the clans of the Wet'suwet'en Nation that has been resisting multiple pipeline projects over the last decade in our territory in so-called Canada. We have most recently been resisting the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which spans over 600 kilometers from northeastern British Columbia to the coast to the LNG Canada project, which would export fracked gas over to Asian markets.
So now, again, I think this video is incredible. We're just going to do the first two examples, go through them. But in terms of establishing boundaries against an oppressive state, she's very clear. This is what's being protected, right? Is this homeland, and they're showing these just beautiful images of the nature in the surrounding area, the territory that they are defending. And I think that's important when we assert boundaries, is to say this is what we're protecting. In our case, it's going to be human rights. This idea of human rights is going to be respected by this government, or this government's not going to exist. But we'll continue.
The struggle against Coastal GasLink has been largely surrounding the importance of Wet'suwet'en, the main salmon-bearing river that our nation and many other nations rely on. Salmon is a staple food to the Wet'suwet'en and to many Indigenous nations in our area. It's also one of the last clean drinking water sources in our territory. All of the communities out on our Yinta rely on that water. So it's a really sacred responsibility that we have as Cassia and Wet'suwet'en people for not only the future of all of our generations, but also the nations downriver from us.
And here's another thing that I really love about like the First Nations peoples, or the Native Americans here in the States. When you hear her talk, she's not really talking about this is my land, I deserve to make profit from it. She's talking about the moral responsibility about making sure that the generations that come in the future will have a world, a land where they can drink the water. And they've managed, despite all of the industrialization that has taken place in the global north, as it's called, they've managed to keep this land unceded, and they've managed to, for the most part, keep their lands unpolluted from, the fossil fuel industry, which is a fantastic victory in itself. Though we do see that eventually this line went through. We know with like No Dapple, that was a crushing loss, and I think we're going to talk a lot about that point in U.S. history very soon, because it's another perfect example of how to organize and fight, even though they lost. The the resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline and the mercenaries that forced it through, and the lobbyists that legislated it through, and all the different mechanisms of oppression. It was a very good fight, and there's a lot to learn from it.
The CURG is the Community Industry Response Group, a specialized unit of police that specifically deals with protecting industrial projects for private industry.
Been through this every day, every week. Right? Yeah. That's what I'm getting paid for.
And so this is fully funded by the project.
And so we see that these are either they're members of the state or they are just a private force from corporations to protect the interests of corporations, not the interests of people. So that's a very important thing to look at here, because even in soft fascism, this is, hi, yes, you're so lovely, you're my baby. But even things that we don't want to call fascism, like that is it right there. That was an example of the state either allowing or supporting or contributing to the idea that a police task force can operate against human rights for the benefit of a corporation's profits, which is a very bad sentiment if you want to have protected human rights.
Province and Canada to repress Indigenous people. These units are highly specialized and trained, and they've also used different tactics that they've learned in previous wars around the world to repress any sort of uprisings.
A breakthrough today in those tense talks in BC to settle that pipeline protest and end rail blockades across Canada. There's word a proposed arrangement on land rights and title has been reached between Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs and the federal government.
The new How to Train Your Dragon.
So obnoxious. I should get a fucking actual subscription now, shouldn't I? If I'm gonna be doing any kind of this shit. Oh my god. I hate this so much.
The injunctions must be obeyed. The barricades must come down.
After Shutdown Canada, which was a coordinated effort all across so-called Canada by Indigenous nations and other allies and accomplices, the state brought forward an MOU to sign with the Wet'suwet'en, but it was really a tactic to try to remove the blockades, to try to get everybody to stand down, to try to encourage and divide Wet'suwet'en people into negotiating some of these projects and some of these issues where we've been standing firm for thousands of years, and in the past decade specifically, with multiple pipelines, some of which have come and gone and have never been built. Coastal GasLink is the first project that actually had so-called success, even though the amount of money that they had to put in was, over double what they had anticipated.
So, if you're seeing what happened there, it was really an intention by the state to negotiate terms wherein the First Nations people would allow this to go through, and effectively sowed enough division and, I guess, bribed decision makers in enough of an effective way to, in terms of like legally pushing through this pipeline. And she said that their resistance made the project cost over double the amount. Unfortunately, that doesn't matter because it's not their money. If you look at the United States, for example, the reason like oil companies can just break every law without hiding it if they want to and be cited for, you know, tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars for breaking laws, they just increase their gas prices, right? They just increase what they're selling to that, and it's not like with the infrastructure that we have in the States that it can really be boycotted because we don't have the public transportation infrastructure. The fact is, you're going to be handing money to these corporations hand over fist, whether you like them or not. And a lot of times people look at the fact that, courts issue citations against these companies for breaking laws, but it's not their money. Does that much money leave their account? Yeah. But the moment they want it back, because it's a captive market, are you going to not go to work anymore? Are you going to not drive to the grocery store? It's, you know, it's a captive market. There's no such thing as uh, being able to dismantle a company like this through citations because they can just extract whatever amount of profit that they want out of people who can't say no, because to say no is to not be a part of society and not be commuting and getting a paycheck and all that.
Currently, Coastal GasLink is trying to double the capacity of the pipeline. And so we always knew that if one pipeline was to get through, then many more would follow. At one point, there were, over a dozen that were proposed in the north, in the area that we live in. And so we know that we have to set the precedent. We have to fight as hard as we can.
And that is, excellent. She said like over a dozen were proposed, and this is the first one that's gone through in any capacity, really. So that means that their resistance had to this point been incredibly effective, and as more threatened their land with pollution and just colonialism in general, they plan on fighting harder and, keeping at it. And another thing, I want to back up a little bit.
That were proposed in the north, in the area that we live in. And so we know that we have to set the precedent.
Right there. We have to set the precedent. Right. When we're talking about boundaries, we need to know what it is that we're defending. This idea of setting the precedent, that this is how it's going to be. And I think that little quote I played earlier is very much akin to, this is the precedent we set. If you want peace, this is the price. But we'll continue.
We have to fight as hard as we can in order to show the government and show the world that these are the things that are worth fighting for.
The BC government, federal government, there will be no trucks on my territory. You will not destroy our rivers or creeks, because I don't stand on Crown land. I stand on our land. And by God, I will defend it.
Listen to that. Listen to how clear these boundaries are. Listen to, I love what she says. It's so cathartic to just hear.
World that these are the things that are worth fighting for.
The BC government, federal government, there will be no trucks on my territory.
There will be no trucks on my territory. Love it.
You will not destroy our rivers or creeks, because I don't stand on Crown land. I stand on our land.
You will not destroy our rivers and creeks. I do not stand on Crown land. I stand on our land. It's just so, we aren't pretending that it's up to the legislators what the borders are. This is our land, and we don't compromise. And I fucking love that. And I think we need that sentiment a lot more when we see things encroaching on human rights. Now, obviously, the situation that they're in is also riddled with, human rights issues. Uh, but in terms of like asserting boundaries, it is kind of excellent to use an example where it is about the land.
And by God, I will defend it.
And by
Like
God, I
the
will
West
defend it. That's, if you want peace, this is the price. You're going to respect the land. We're not going to stop fighting for it.
Have been ancient allies for thousands of years. They supported us in our struggle, and now they're facing the PRGT pipeline, which is owned by TC Energy, the same company that owns Coastal GasLink. And so we see what is coming. We've seen the state repression, we've seen the fallout of that and the impacts of that, the trauma, the criminalization. And so we're able to take those lessons and to share them. And I think that it's really important that we stand together and that we continue to fight as hard as we can so that this does not become the norm. We have to take a stand and say that we're not going to allow for these kinds of things to happen. We know what the consequences will be. Our ancestors have told us stories about what is to come in the future. And so we know that we have the responsibility to stop dead in its tracks the route that we're on towards the destruction of our entire planet.
Beautiful. Fucking beautiful. And this is why we need organization. This is awesome.
I'm Isa, and I'm speaking to you from the ZAD of Notre-Dame-des-Landes in the west of France, where I've been living since 2016. It's a large territory. It's 4,000 acres of wetland and farmland that could have been destroyed by an international airport project if there had not been an incredible struggle. The project was announced in the 60s and was immediately resisted by farmers. It went into
So again, when we're talking like soft fascism or soft authoritarianism, in the 60s in France, there was a unilateral decision to displace a ton of farmers to create an airport. Obviously, the farmers didn't get a say in that in terms of the decision-making process, so they resisted it, as they should. It's their homes, their land. That project, though maybe you could argue that it would have been beneficial for the economy or whatever, if you value democracy, you value the people who, you value the idea that other people have a say in it. And actually, I don't even want to say it that way. Democracy is not what people in the United States think democracy is. People in the United States think if you get a say, it's democratic. Democracy is actually the power of the people as a noun, and as a verb, democracy is the process of trying to reach a consensus and then making the best decision for everybody when a consensus cannot be reached, which is not something that you can say the United States has been doing, at least for my entire lifetime. But we're going to continue.
For a couple of decades and got taken out of the boxes in the year 2000, where the resistance got immediately reactivated, but going beyond just the farmers and extending to local people. The government started expropriating people to make way for the...
And just a quick thing is, that's excellent. There was a show of solidarity from people who had weren't stakeholders in the land. They weren't farmers. Some of them probably knew farmers. A ton of those people had nothing to gain from saying, this is not going to happen. You're not building that airport and forcibly displacing, the farmers and devastating the farmland. There were a bunch of people in solidarities, whether they could have benefited or not, coming together to assert that boundary.
The airport. And some of the inhabitants of the zone wrote an open letter where they memorably said, to defend a territory, you need to inhabit it. invited people to come and squat land and buildings to be able to resist. And this is really where the ZAD, which initially is an administrative acronym that means Zone Aménagement Différé, i.e. a piece of land that is earmarked for an infrastructure, became the Zone à Défendre, the zone to defend, and where the slogan against the airport and its world really started to flourish.
De son côté, la préfecture assure que le projet suit son cours, encadré par les forces de l'ordre nécessaires, sans préciser le nombre.
Les pressions policières feront pas céder la résistance.
Il faudra qu'ils viennent nous virer, mais bon, on se laissera pas faire. Hein. On se laissera pas faire, on n'est pas prêt de partir. Hein.
Obviously, there's kind of occupation.
That's excellent. So, there's an open invitation for as many people to come live there to defend the land as they want and to build on the land and all of that. And the people, the law or the state says, y'all gotta fucking get out of here. And they're like, nah, we're not gonna be evicted. And that's an excellent boundary, and I fully support it.
Was not seen very positively by the authorities, and in 2012 there was a military operation called Operation Caesar that came to try and evict the squatters. After 40,000 people rebuilt a hamlet in one weekend, and
so I mean, you saw the fucking line of armored vehicles, right? We'll go back to
by the authorities, and in 2012 there was a military operation called Operation.
Look at that. That's fucking insanity. These are people who are just saying, no, you're not devastating a bunch of farmland and, you know, forcing people off their land. So I think history will understand very clearly that these, you know, mercenaries on salary puppet strings are operating against the idea of liberation, against the idea of human rights and self-ownership, as well as the ownership and self-determination of peoples.
Build something, they're not going to let it be just.
Okay, so, and then they went in there, Operation Caesar, and destroyed everything. But, we'll just go back here.
After 40,000 people rebuilt a hamlet in one weekend, and after the cops tried again to destroy that hamlet, the conflict really peaked, because when 40,000 people turn up to build something, they're not going to let it be destroyed without fighting. And the resistance.
I think it's also important to realize, you know, when you have 40,000 people who are dedicated to a cause and saying, you know, this is what we're building. It's not up to the state whether or not this is destroyed. That's a pretty powerful movement, to have 40,000 people on the same page about something and being willing to employ direct action to do something about it. That's a beautiful thing.
Was so fierce, the cops withdrew for more than 6 years. And so it really became a laboratory where people could really see what it's like to live together and build the commons without cops, without planning permission, and with all the difficulties that it brings about to try to do this. In 2016, all the legal procedures that were still fighting the project got to term, and they all were lost. The struggle has actually lost 178 legal procedures, but still won the war. And so in 2016, 40,000 people came and brought a walking stick and planted it in the land of Notre-Dame-des-Landes, making a pledge that it would come back to pick up that stick if the authorities came back to build the airport. And so there's kind of
look at that boundary. That's fucking perfect. God, that's so beautiful. 40,000 people come back to put a stick
and brought a walking
along
stick
a
and
post, like
planted
along
it
a
in the
fence
land
line.
of Notre-Dame-des-Landes, making a pledge that it would come back
And
to
it's a
pick up
visual
that stick if
representation
the
of the
authorities
solidarity.
came back to build the.
Look at that. This is all people who made a promise that if there's going to be a state eviction of this land, if mercenaries are going to be sent in to do this, whether they're federal agents or not, we're coming back and we're going to fucking stop it. And that is, when we're talking about what's required in asserting boundaries against the state, I think that is an absolutely fucking fantastic example. Absolutely beautiful. I love it.
The airport. And so this kind of incredible mobilization led to January 2018, where the government announced that the airport would not be built because it was not possible, and announced in the same breath that those who were here illegally, i.e. all those who had come on the invitation of local people, would have to leave or be evicted. And so there was another wave of very violent evictions in April 2018. We were kind of forced into legalization, which created very, very intense debate and conflicts. A lot of people left the ZAD at that point, but today about 180 people are still living here.
And that's what I wanted to show today, is examples of effective means of resisting the state with very clear boundaries on this is what we're defending, and if you don't like it, here's what you can do to respect these things that we are defending. But I think I'll be back on here. I'm gonna be devoting a lot more time to this entire idea because it just seems more important than any other thing that I could be working on. So thanks for sticking around, and we're going to continue this conversation later.